The other question is choosing the right executor, and this can be actually quite challenging, whether it's somebody who's a single person with no children, or even somebody who's married. Having someone who's the right person to administer the estate.
That's true, because an executor's role is vast and varied. They're the person or group of people responsible for organising your funeral, working out what assets you own and liabilities you owe at the date of your death. They have responsibility for coordinating the tidy up of your garage and your fridge and all those kinds of things, looking after your pets. So it can be a complicated role, and sometimes people look around their family group and think, oh, who am I going to lump this on? And my advice has always been, if you've got willing and able family members, that's the best place to start.
Yes.
They know you, they know your circumstances, they're likely to know people referred to in the will, so they're not starting from a blank sheet, if you like. But often people say, look, I just don't want to burden my children or my spouse with that responsibility, so they start looking a bit broader than that, maybe a friend, a trusted friend.
Yes.
And if they get to the end of all of that and think, well, I don't want to put it on any of those people, then that's when you look to a professional advisor, trustee company,
yep,
or some other professional.
What are some of the examples of where a family member has worked well or not, or what are some of the scenarios that you have experienced that you just in a particular scenario you would warn against?
If you have a hunch that children are not going to get along well, or they don't get along well in lifetime, the chances are they're probably going to get along less well in death.
Yes.
And you can be left with a deadlock. And so often the reasons why people appoint independent trustees is because they just don't think that people are going to get along very well.
Okay, yes.
Or they appoint one and not two or the others, and that results in a conflict of interest where the one takes charge and runs off and
administers it all for their benefit.
Looks after themselves. So often people have an inkling of how things are going to go at the point of making the will. So if there's an inkling of dispute or tension, be very careful about that. But you can see some terrible barneys over administrations of estates, purely from an executorial function.
Yeah, okay. So children who aren't in agreement. Any other scenarios that you can think of?
Well, not appointing enough, so they appoint each other but don't have a successor at all, or appointing people in the generation up and they're just too old
to administer it.
To administer it.
Yeah.
So you've really got to get someone responsible and someone in the right demographic.
Yes.
Yeah, don't appoint your 87-year-old aunt to be your executor, because it's just not going to work out.
Yes. So we've talked through choosing the right executor. We've talked through a couple of examples.
On that question, Gavin,
yes, sorry, go on.
if you're going to appoint a professional executor,
yes,
that will cost.
Okay, so that's a drawback of that scenario.
That's a drawback of that scenario.
And how does that work out? What's the method of charging for that?
Yeah, look, an individual. If you appointed me as your executor, for example,
yes,
as a person, as a lay person, let's say I could still apply to the court for a commission.
Okay.
So an individual can still apply, but often if it's a friend or family member, they tend not to, even though they're entitled to apply. Professional executors will generally just take their commission regardless.
Okay. And what's that? Is that a statutory rate?
It's a statutory rate for a trustee company.
Okay.
But these days, trustee companies are very flexible, very competitive, very willing to talk about that now.
Okay.
So my advice is, if you're going to appoint a professional trustee company, talk about commission with them up front.
So before or whilst you're going through the will setup process.
As you're doing the will. Yeah. Make contact with them and say, I want to appoint you as a trustee of my estate. Here's what my estate looks like.
Yeah.
Let's do a deal today so there's no uncertainty later.
Yes.
If you do it today, you'll get a much better rate than if you leave it for later.
Okay. And is there a set percentage amount, and is that percentage... Is it often that you negotiate a percentage down, or is it more of a fixed rate that you...
No, it's usually a percentage.
Normally a percentage, yeah. Okay.
Look, I forget what the prescribed trustee rate is these days. It's the maximum is about 6% of the gross value of the estate. But very rarely do you see trustee companies actually applying that rate if they're contacted early on and they have the chance to review it and discuss it. You can generally negotiate that down.
How does that work? Do they have minimum thresholds as well? Because, say, for example, they've got it at the time that they negotiate the will.
Yep.
There's $2 million worth of assets, and they're going to get 2% of that.
Yes.
And then by the time their assets by the time the will is administered, there's $100,000 worth of assets, and they're going to get 2% of that.
Yeah, they will generally have a minimum.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but look, and professional trustees are great. If you've got long-term trusts that need to be administered for beneficiaries with a disability or whatever, that's a much better role for a professional trustee than it is a family member who's going to die as well.
Yes.
Because trustee companies live on.
Yes.
Individuals don't.
Okay.